Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to another ISE webinar. I'm Claire Tyler, Head of Insights at ISE. So today we're going to be talking about reasonable adjustments in practice and creating inclusive recruitment processes. We're joined by the wonderful Helen Cook, who is CEO and founder of MyPlus, and Rory Stokes, who's an early careers recruitment manager at Capgemini. Helen and Rory are going to use their expertise to guide us through using reasonable adjustments in practice. It'll be particularly useful for anyone who's keen to learn more about supporting disabled applicants through hiring processes. So they're going to provide us with some practical tools, some case studies, and a clear roadmap for creating inclusive recruitment processes. At the end of the presentation, we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. So please can I ask you to share your questions during the webinar using the Q&A function below. The chat box will also be open for your comments and any thoughts, so feel free to interact there if you'd like to. But remember to put those questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat, because it just makes it easier for us to monitor them at our end. So without further ado, we'll get started. Over to you, Helen.
Lovely, Claire. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Absolutely delighted that you're joining Rory and myself this morning. So I know that some of you know who I am. You've been to our events before, but for those of you who don't, as Claire said, I'm the CEO and founder of MyPlus. And our vision is to ensure that having a disability doesn't prevent anyone from having the career that they want to have. I'm very passionate about that. I'm a wheelchair user. I've been fortunate enough to have had an enjoyable career since I graduated many years ago, starting with Marks and Spencer on their management program, and then joining Mars and the wonderful world of chocolate, where I moved into HR and recruitment and early careers. Today, we are going to be talking all about adjustments in the recruitment process. You will be aware that as an employer, you have, dare I say, a duty, very legal duty to make reasonable adjustments. But I think for most of us, we don't do it because we have this responsibility, because it's a legal request. We do it because we're all about recruiting talent. And talent includes individuals that have a disability. Currently, 18% of students in UK universities have a disability. That's predicted to increase to 30% by 2030. I've just been looking at the data that Target Jobs collects, the civil data. 25% of their respondents in this year's research had a disability. So we need to be able to support people through our recruitment process if we're serious about getting talent in. So I'm going to be talking about, about adjustments, implementing adjustments, what's reasonable. Delighted that I'm going to be joined by Rory, who's going to bring this to life by sharing some of the requests that they've had at Capgemini. He's going to go through a particular case study. So he'll be able to bring that to life. And I'm not going to stop for questions as we go. As Claire said, we'll take those at the end. So there's a lot about, I guess, there's a lot, we're going to go through quite a lot. And I think there's sort of 8 key takeaways. And actually, this was a blog that I wrote for the ISE on their website, which you can have a look at afterwards, that I guess we're going to touch on as we go through, which, adjustments are about leveling the playing field. It is about going beyond the law that doesn't ask us to do very much, really. It asks us to make reasonable adjustments. Drop the legal jargon, ask early, ask often, tailor support to the individual, focus on support, not the disability, keep it to recruitment. There's a limit to what you can ask before an offer of employment's made. We shouldn't be asking about adjustments in the workplace, what might be required during the recruitment process. Legally, you can't do that. And be ready to problem solve, because not all of the adjustment requests you're going to get are straightforward. So these are the types of things we're going to be talking about. Now, there's a lot of noise, I guess, about adjustments, and some of it is around, why are we doing this? Are adjustments special treatment? Is it a perk? Are people wanting to be, advantaged rather than just level the playing field? And I had some fun finding parking photographs. One of my favourite subjects, or least favourite subjects, with the huge escalation in the handing out blue badges. Somebody like me needs accessible parking. I can't get my wheelchair out of my car otherwise. But actually, when people sort of give it lip service, It's a barrier. This person now cannot get back into their vehicle. I had loads of pictures. I got a bit carried away, but just another one. Somebody's actually decided to park on the bit that says don't park because we need this space. There were loads of these, but this is not about an advantage. It's about leveling the playing field. So I guess the first question is, do barriers exist? Why are we having this conversation? Are there still barriers in the recruitment process? Well, yes, there are. So in terms of requesting support, it's all about openness. It's all about disclosure. If we don't disclose our disability, we can't request what we need. 75% of neurodiverse employees mask their condition in the workplace. Similar figure to 76% of students not wanting to disclose their disability to an employer. That was research, which I'm going to talk a bit more about, that we did a few years ago. 78% of disabled employees said that they, rather than their employer, had to initiate the process of getting adjustments. So this is the workplace itself. It's hard enough starting a new job, settling in, but for people with disabilities, they're having to actually go through this adjustment process and they're having to drive it. 58% of employees said getting the adjustments they needed was due to how assertive and confident they are to ask for that support. I think that disabled individuals have to learn to advocate for themselves more than others. That was the first webinar we did earlier this year for disabled students, and it's probably one of the best attended we've ever had. They've got to learn to be able to advocate for themselves. And 56% of employees said that there are still disability-related barriers in the workplace, even after adjustments have been made. So yes, adjustments, barriers in the recruitment in the workplace and during recruitment very much still exist. So before we get on to the sort of practicalities of providing adjustments, let's just remind ourselves sort of where this comes from and what the law says. So this whole phrase, reasonable adjustments, comes from originally the Disability Discrimination Act and now equality law, which recognises that achieving equality for disabled people may mean changing the way that employment's structured. We used to think that to treat people fairly, we had to treat everyone the same. But actually what we've realised now is to treat people fairly, sometimes we have to do things differently. And this is this duty to make reasonable adjustments. And as an employer, you have to remove, reduce, or prevent the obstacles that individuals face either in the workplace or as an applicant where it's reasonable to do so. What does that mean in practice? Well, you may need to change the way things are done. You may need to change a physical feature, or you may have to provide extra aids or support. What do these mean? We're talking recruitment here, so I'm not talking about the workplace. Let's talk about recruitment. So we're changing the way things are done. We know that certain individuals with certain disabilities are going to hit barriers in parts of your recruitment process. It might be the video interview. It might be a group discussion. We still have to assess them. I'm not a big advocate of missing out parts of the process, although I'm sure we'll come on and talk about situational judgment tests at some point. So if somebody says, for example, I have a hearing impairment, I'm going to struggle with a group discussion, they still need to be assessed for what that group discussion is assessing them for: problem solving, influencing, teamwork, but we might have to do it in a different way. So we're changing the way that we're actually assessing the individual. We may need to change a physical feature, and I think our mind immediately goes to wheelchair access, but it's more than that. It might be lighting, it might be noise, it might be allowing someone to wear noise-cancelling headphones, it might be to do with the heating. So we're looking at the physical features. Flickering blinds or flickering lights for someone who's neurodivergent can be a huge challenge, a barrier, a distraction in a recruitment process. And you may have to provide extra aids or support, and that might be technology, allowing people to use technology that you're not allowing other individuals to use, or it might be about maybe a support animal, having someone accompany them onto the premise. We've had a couple of interesting ones here. I had a question from a client about we're not allowing individuals to use AI in the final assessment. But if we say that for disabled individuals, are we disadvantaging them? And I kind of think, well, disabled individuals didn't use AI previously, and we still managed to put support in place. So I'm not sure why they should be able to use AI unless it's for that adjustment, unless it's for, somebody who's deaf, who's using some kind of app for communication. And I also had another one recently where somebody had requested to bring, I think they were autistic, a support worker into the interview with them to give them prompts if need be. We decided that that wasn't acceptable. Yes, I might need somebody to come with me, to travel with me because of access requirements or because I'm incredibly anxious, but not in the interview itself. So tip of the iceberg, I'm sure you're doing all of these physical access changes to the format. Sometimes it's just understanding. I often find this with individuals who are very anxious, will say, I don't know what I need. I don't think I need anything, a physical change. And it's like, well, would it help if there was understanding? Would it help if the recruiters, those interviewing you, were aware that you might become more anxious than others? They're not going to comment on it. They're not going to mention it. But that understanding would be there. And sometimes that could be quite a reassurance. It would be good actually to hear from you in the chat what sort of adjustments and support you're putting in place, or indeed any comments or observations you want to use the chat for. I know a lot of you have got quite a lot of experience in this, so please do share in the chat box. And my final part on this bit is I am not a big fan of the word reasonable adjustments. It's a very legal phrase. And it's ambiguous. What's reasonable? You as employers are asking what's reasonable. How far do we have to go? Do we have to do this? And equally, the individual who finds it incredibly difficult to request support in the first place, we're going to come on to that. 76% don't want to be open. They're going to struggle to request support. And then we say to them, and you can only ask for what's reasonable. So it's not a helpful phrase. And I think just more everyday language, how can we support you, is more helpful. If you require any support or adjustments for any reason, including those related to a disability, please let us know. Let's discuss this with you. But I know you can't all do this because of your policies, but let's try and remove this word reasonable adjustments. So as we're going through this again, please do think about sort of the questions that you might like to ask at the end. We can come back to those. Now, before I go on to talk about implementing support, I wanted to talk about this wonderful topic of often known as disclosure. Disclosure declaration, it's not helpful. It makes it sound like we've got this horrible secret. So at MyPlus, we tend to talk about openness. We talk about informing, sharing information, telling. And the reason I want to talk about it here is that being able to request adjustments hangs on whether or not the individual is going to tell you that they have a disability. We need to encourage them to feel that they can be open with you in order that they can then get the support that they need. So it won't be any surprise, 76% of individuals don't want to tell their employer about their disability. This was research we did amongst students and recent graduates, 76%. That's an awful lot of fear. Now let's use the chat here. What are they afraid of? Why don't they want to tell you that they have a disability? Why don't they want to be open? Why don't they want to disclose? What's holding them back? What are they going to tell us? Let's see what you say. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Judgment, negative judgment impacts their application. I guess fear of discrimination. What else do you think? I was running an insight event for a firm last week, and I asked the students, and straight away, two of them, hand in the air, the disabled students, a fear that you're going to see me in an unfavourable light as less capable. 20 years into this, I really struggle still to hear that that's how they see themselves. The whole premise of MyPlus is that actually having a disability and managing it in a world that's not geared up for it, you develop certain skills and strengths. I've been in that situation where someone's parked so close, I can't get my car out. And you have to go into problem solving mode and you have to approach someone else to move your car for you. And actually those communication skills, problem solving skills, that determination are all things that you're recruiting for, but that's not how they see it at this point. Yeah, I'm sure who this information is going to be shared with. I don't think we talk about confidentiality enough. My fear is I'm going to tell you and everybody else is going to know something that's actually very personal to me. So fear of discrimination is the biggie. I tell you, you don't want me because of these negative judgments that you don't think I'm capable, you think I'm less able. I think there's also quite a lot about I don't want to cause a fuss or a hassle. So the start of your recruitment process, it's a funnel, isn't it? And at the beginning, you're taking people out. You've got so many people that have applied, you're taking people out, and they don't want to give you another reason to take them out. And if they think that asking for an adjustment request, particularly when it costs money that no one else is seemingly asked for. They are, because 18% of students have a disability. They're just a hustle. They're just I was going to say a hustle, a fuss. They're causing a fuss. They're being a hassle, and you'll take them out of the process. That's the other question I get asked. Why would you recruit me when you can recruit someone that you don't have to do this for? Again, it's heartbreaking. Yeah, all of these comments, yeah, I think we've talked about those. Don't want to be treated differently. Again, I've had situations where employers have said to me, well, someone's told us they're neurodivergent, so we're going to put them in a separate room. I was like, have you asked them if they want that? And when they asked the individual, no, they didn't. They didn't want to be in a separate room. They wanted to be able to take rest breaks, and they wanted to be able to wear noise-cancelling headphones at certain points, but they didn't want to be in a separate process. They don't want to be treated differently. So how do we encourage openness? Well, it's about articulating your approach to diversity and disability. They're going to go to your website. It's got to be easy to find. And the other thing that I get asked a lot is, how do we bring it to life? How do I know this firm is going to support me? Well, that's where your role models come in. This is where your case studies come in. On our Students Club platform, one of the most visited areas is the true stories, hearing from people, for example, at Capgemini, who have been through the process, who've been supported and into the workplace. That's what brings it to life. We need to let them know how this information is going to be used, and we need to reassure them about confidentiality. We ask them to share something that's pretty personal. They don't know you. And their fear is that they're going to come into their assessment centre and everyone's going to know. Well, of course, that's not the case, but they don't know that. We need to make it easy for them to be open. We need to ask them often and at every point in the process. They are unlikely to tell you straight off on their application form, but as they go through the process, they maybe hit barriers, they get to know you, they really want to work for you, they are more likely to be open. So make it easy. Start by providing space on the application form and then ask them in every single correspondence that goes out. And educate them on the benefits of being open. I think we all hear students say, well, I'm not going to be open. I've heard that people that when they put it on their, application form, they immediately get rejected. Of course, that's not the case, but that's what they think. Bad news travels better than good news. So educate them on the benefits of being open. And the biggest benefit is they can request the support that they need. In our marketing toolkit, we've got frequently asked questions, for example, that you can put in your frequently asked questions section, and that might be one of them. Why do you ask me if I have a disability? Let them know that it's about providing support and adjustments. The other thing that actually was brought to my attention a few years ago by the careers advisors is that students think that when they fill in your equal opportunities form, when they tick, yes, I have a disability, that you're going to see that and you're going to pick it up and be in contact. And obviously you're not, you don't see that information. So again, we need to make it very clear that the information on that equal ops form is not seen by recruiters. And if they need adjustments, they've got to ask you in addition to that. So we've talked a bit now about why, the implementing support, why we offer it, your responsibilities, the bit that comes before that, which is about encouraging openness. And I'm now going to talk about actually implementing support. And then I'm going to pass over to Rory, who's going to sort of bring this to life for us. So actually, what's the process to implementing support? Well, I think before we talk about implementing it, what we have to understand here is the barriers. There are a lot of barriers to requesting support in the recruitment process. So those barriers include, and you may have more of these, please do share them, is first of all, the individual doesn't know what they need. And I get asked that a lot from the students. I don't know what I require. It may be a recently diagnosed disability. They may not have come through a recruitment process before. Often when it fluctuates, they don't know what to ask for. They don't know what you can provide, what's reasonable to ask for. And there's a lack of information about that and how to go about it. There's a perceived stigma about asking all the things that we've talked about, the being a burden for every student, that's perhaps asks for too much. You've got 100 that won't ask for enough because they don't like to, and the judgments that are going to be made. I think that we place the burden on the individual. What do you need rather than what can we do for you? What do you require rather than actually as an employer, what can we do to support you? And I think changing that narrative can be quite powerful. I think there are unclear pathways. Maybe we ask, do you require support on the application form? We don't tell them what's going to happen next. We don't have that information on our website. So I think we could be a lot clearer in articulating what the process is that we'll go through to get that support. And we've already talked about this. They're worried as being seen as weak. That's a phrase that they've used, that I'm going to be seen as weak. Some of them see themselves as a lesser candidate, or indeed of getting preferential treatment. And the majority of individuals, they don't want that. They want to get their role on merit like everybody else, and certainly don't want to be seen. They don't want to be discriminated against, but they don't want favourable treatment. So when we put support in place in the recruitment process, it needs to be preventative rather than reactionary, which is why we need them to be open with us so we can put it in place rather than they turn up on the day and they struggle. I've talked about the narrative, changing it from how do you work best to what support do you need. And the support process must be fluid and open. It's not going to be one conversation. Let's put this in place and that's it. As they go through the process, they may realize that they need more support, and equally they may feel more comfortable to actually request that support. So they're going to come back to you. And as I've said, we need to recognize that the individual might not know what they need and what they will benefit from. And we're going to talk about that now. So for me, the easiest way of putting support in place is to engage in conversation, is to have a telephone call with the individual if they're able to do that. Now, during that call, the focus needs to be on what support they're going to require during the recruitment process rather than their disability. And I say that because legally, and I'm sure you all know this, there is a limit to what you can ask before an offer of employment is made. So you can't ask them what you will require in the workplace if you're successful. And the information they provide should only be used for recruitment purposes. I had a call with a client recently, and they said, we have somebody who has requested a British Sign Language interpreter for the assessment centre. Do I have to provide that, Helen? They want it all day. I said, yeah, absolutely you do. That's a very reasonable request. And they said, yeah, but if they're successful, we can't provide an interpreter every day. It's way too expensive. And I'm like, whoa, we're making the assumption that they need that, which may not be the case. And actually, you can't actually have that conversation with them anyway. And I did give them the example of somebody that I met who is profoundly deaf. He's non-verbal. Actually, Edward spoke at an ISE D&I conference probably a couple of years ago. And he has a sign language interpreter with him in the office once or maybe twice a week. And the rest of the days, it's communicating on instant messenger or email or whatever. So focus on what's required or on what support's required in the recruitment process and not what their disability is. I say to the students, they don't know what information to share. The recruiters, they're not medics. They don't want to know the ins and outs of your disability. They want to focus on what support you need and why you need it. So explain each stage of your recruitment process, take them through your process. And identify where those barriers are going to be. And then you need to talk about actually how do we remove those barriers? And that's where the adjustments piece come in. I would confirm your conversation and what you've agreed by email to them. That's your paper trail. If they come back at any point and say, well, I've been rejected because you didn't put in place what I needed, then you can go back and say, well, actually, this is the conversation we had. This is what we put in place. You emailed back and said you were happy with that. It's your paper trail. Ask them if they wish the assessors to be informed about their disability. It's not for you just to tell the assessors. You shouldn't be doing that without their permission. They will probably say, well, what would you do? And, I would always say if it's a visible disability, I'd probably let them know because it's not what they're expecting. They weren't expecting me to turn up in a wheelchair when I applied to M&S or Mars. So I let them know in advance to take that element of surprise out. But let them know that they are not going to refer to their disability. They're not going to refer to any adjustments. I've had students in the past say to me, I was sitting there waiting for them to bring it up and they didn't. And I'm like, well, of course they didn't. And they were like, well, I didn't know that. And, they're concentrating or they're distracted by this. At some point, this hiring manager is going to ask me about it. And they're not focusing 100% on their interview. So let them know what's going to happen. And ensure they've got your contact details and your contact details as opposed to a sort of a generic, recruitment at, Capgemini, for example, .com. Let them have your personal details. And if you're going on holiday, your colleagues. This is an extra stage of the process that their disabled colleagues, that their non-disabled counterparts are not going through, and it's time consuming and worrying for them. And the last thing they want to do is to repeat themselves because every time they, communicate with somebody, whether by phone or by email, they're having to start again and explaining everything. So ensure they've got your contact details. Ideally have one point of contact. And if you are going on holiday, hand over and let them know that. So that's what I was going to say on the sort of implementing adjustments. I'm going to hand over now to Rory, who will introduce himself and talk about what they've been doing at Capgemini. So Rory, over to you.
Helen, I'm just looking at the state of my slides compared to your slides. They're so much neater than mine. I probably should have spent a bit more time working on my slides. But anyway, yeah, good to see everybody. Say my name's Rory. I'm a early careers recruitment manager at Capgemini, and I'm just going to really talk now about how we put into practice some of the things that Helen has spoke about today. So Helen, if you wouldn't mind just going over to the next slide, please. We're just going to talk first about what our philosophy is on adjustments and how we can make them work, both to make these things as accessible for candidates as possible, but also how that helps us on a broader scale, really. So I think one of the major takeaways that we have learned through our time is that every case really is different, and you need to approach every single candidate who's requested adjustments differently. Helen's already gone through how some candidates are maybe a little bit uncertain about the application process. They might be a little uncomfortable sharing the nature of their disability, and obviously all disabilities are different as well. So it's very important to treat each case with an open mind and to not follow specific templates. We are absolutely not the experts. I do not claim to be an expert. That's why I work with Helen, and I have worked with Helen on several occasions to, best define how to adjust our recruitment process for candidates. So we've been working with MyPlus for a number of years now, and we often consult with them when it comes to, some applications, some cases that we might not be sure about. One thing that we do know, though, something that we always stick with, we feel that staying in touch with the candidate throughout the entire process, clear communication, often just having one person, one point of contact, that's often the best way to go. This, my job as a recruiter, I almost act as a caseworker for individual candidates. So, as I said, you can be that one point of contact, and the candidate's more comfortable talking with you. So that's one thing that was one rule that we always tend to stick with. On top of this, I will explain our application process in a bit more detail in just a second, but throughout every stage of our application process, we give candidates the opportunity to divulge any requirements they have. We make it very clear that we do offer adjustments, and we also make it clear that, we are ultimately a disability confident employer, and we really do try and hammer that home at every stage of the application process, just to really, get candidates to feel like they can feel comfortable in actually disclosing to us. So oftentimes students will actually let us know in the initial application stage, but as I just said, then they can disclose these disabilities or adjustments at any point in the application stage, and that's absolutely fine. A lot of the time, though, those conversations that we have around adjustments do only take place further down the application process as the application process gets more intense, should I say, more complex. So ultimately, being that first point of contact, making sure that candidates can lead the discussion around their own requirements. We feel like this is the best way to ensure that candidates are comfortable and confident throughout the application process. We really want candidates to be in charge of their own adjustments to an extent, because we feel that this is the best way that they can stay comfortable, whilst obviously maintaining the integrity of the application process. As Helen has said, adjustments are great for so many reasons, but if they are going a little bit too far and making it unfair for the other candidates or giving an unfair advantage, that is something that we try and avoid while staying within the guidelines of what is considered an adjustment. So that's just our philosophy on adjustments. But I'm going to talk now just about our recruitment process. So Helen, if you wouldn't mind just going to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'll talk about our recruitment process quickly. So we at Capgemini, we operate a very simple, I think, application process. It's a three-stage application process. So a written application first. Candidates are expected to submit this online, so they will fill out their details. Obviously, they will answer. They'll provide a CV. They'll answer a few motivational style questions, things like, what do you know about Capgemini? Why have you chosen to apply for this specific role? If they are successful in that stage, they then go to a digital interview. So this is where they record themselves answering questions. Again, the nature of the questions are all very simple. They are things like, can you talk about our core values? Can you explain your understanding of the role you applied to? Across every stage of the application process, we try and avoid overly technical questions. We try and avoid, we definitely do not use what are the types of exercises called? I want to say isometric exercises, but that's not the one. We try and avoid any exercises that are not just sort of asking simple, direct questions.
Are you talking about situational judgment?
That's exactly the one I'm talking about, Helen. Thank you. Good thing I've got an expert on hand to help me out there. Yeah, we try and avoid exercises like this. What we look for specifically at Capgemini is motivation, drive, passion, desire. These are the things that we cannot teach to candidates. We can teach you technical skills. We can teach you, how to handle clients, how to work to deadlines. We cannot teach you that motivation side. And we also think it has a big benefit on helping the more neurodiverse candidates to really let themselves shine throughout the application process as well. So after your digital interview, you will then conduct, for the final stage, you do a assessment centre. So often this is done virtually. However, some of them are face-to-face as well. But the assessment centre is essentially half a day long. It consists of two major exercises. So we'll do a group exercise where you have to work as a team to solve the problem, and also a one-to-one interview, which looks at, again, your motivation for joining, and it will ask you to maybe share some examples from your life of times when you've shown off, specific skills. So a very simple application process, and I'm going to talk in just a second about a candidate that we had who is a fantastic case study for how we implement some of the how we can implement adjustments for a candidate. In this case, it's a neurodiverse candidate. They had autism and ADHD, but regardless of whether it's a physical disability, a mental disability, what I'm about to talk about next really does show our process for putting in these adjustments. So, as I've already said, we make it very clear to candidates that we do offer adjustments throughout the entire process. This can come in a variety of different ways. So, on the initial application stage, there are questions around disabilities, and as Helen has said, we don't say, do you require any reasonable adjustments? We do say, is there any way we can help support you? So straight from the off there is an opportunity for candidates to disclose these disabilities. I would hope as well, before candidates have even applied, they can maybe take a look on our website, read about some of the testimonials from employees that we have around disability in the workplace, because really this awareness starts before they've even applied, and it's important to be shouting about all this stuff well before application. Obviously, as I've already said, it helps candidates to disclose things, but it could also help us on a larger scale, spreading this awareness, and really helping us market these roles better, because ultimately we want to be getting as many people applying as possible. We want to see a great background of candidates, a great range of diverse candidates, and we're simply not going to get that if we are not offering a disability confident application process. So this candidate in particular did make it clear to us that they had autism and ADHD, and they did not actually require any adjustments for the first two stages. It was only when it came to the final stage, the assessment centre, where the candidate made it clear to us that they would like some further assistance in that area. So first thing that we did, I opted to handle this candidate directly because it was a role that I was recruiting for. So first thing that I did, the candidate had emailed me to say what options do you offer for a person with autism and ADHD who is looking to complete an assessment centre. So first thing we did, after consulting with Helen, she gave us plenty of fantastic assistance on this. First thing I did was reach out to the candidate to really just get a phone call with them, to introduce myself, to put them at ease, and then to further go on with the adjustments. I think it's always a good idea to not just call the candidates out of the blue. That can be a little bit overwhelming, especially for neurodiverse candidates. So firstly, I emailed them just to ask them if what time they would be free to discuss these adjustments, and so we got into we got straight into the conversation. So the candidate itself was very aware of his own needs, which is, I would say, quite rare. A lot of candidates, as Helen said, are quite afraid to disclose their disabilities. I feel that some of the work that we are doing has hopefully lowered the number of people who are afraid to disclose their disabilities, but in this case, the candidate was very happy to disclose the requirements that they had. So if you wouldn't mind just going on to the next slide. Thank you, Helen. So here's just some of the adjustments that the candidate had requested. And now you have to look at this with the lens in mind that we do want to maintain that competitive integrity with the assessment centre. So firstly, they wanted everybody else on the assessment centre. It was a virtual assessment centre, this one, so it was conducted over Microsoft Teams. And they wanted everyone on the assessment centre to be aware that the candidate in question, had autism and ADHD. So just to be mindful of that, and any traits that might seem a little bit out of the ordinary, just to understand this person might need a little bit more time. They might need a little bit more time to process things, and just to be aware of that. Now, going about this is obviously it's supposed to be quite delicate with this one. We didn't just turn on the call and first thing at 8:30 in the morning I said, right, everyone, this guy here has autism. That's absolutely not the way to go about it. I again putting the power in the candidate's hands. I asked them how they wanted to do it, and I let them. I let them basically go. Have the power in their hands. So again, they wanted to see the questions in advance. This is quite a difficult one, as we want candidates to be on the same playing field. So for this one, I believe we gave the candidate the questions. We didn't give the questions to the interview in advance, but we gave them maybe an hour before. They wanted them the entire day before. We felt this was just a little bit too far. Because this one candidate did get the questions an hour in advance, we also felt it fair to give all the other candidates on the day the questions an hour in advance as well. We're absolutely not judging anyone on their ability to process information really quickly, so we felt that was completely fair. They maybe like to wear loose-fitting clothing. Sounds already said, that's absolutely fine. We can accommodate that. And the final one I'll talk about was how we often ask probing questions in our interview. Unfamiliar information like this can be quite distressing for a neurodiverse candidate. So on this one, we instructed the assessors, if a candidate had not given enough information, it was okay for the assessors to go and probe a little bit more there. So I'm conscious I'm running out of time a little bit. So Helen, I'm just going to ask you to go to my final slide, please. Maybe just one more if you want to go on. Yes, thank you. I'm going to have to skip a slide. I'm sorry about that. But essentially, the outcome of this was the candidate did incredibly well, and they were actually offered a position. They've been with us for about 2 years now, and they're having a fantastic time. So that's always really, really good to see. The candidate got in touch with me afterwards to say he felt very, very comfortable, and their process was smooth. I was on board throughout the entire process to be that point of contact for him. But here's just a few other examples that we have of other adjustments that we can offer. So extending time for candidates, sharing any materials ahead of time so they'll have more time to process, allowing candidates to have someone else sit in on interviews perhaps. I know, Helen, you spoke about having someone in on the interview to help them. That might be a bit too far, but having someone in just to support them, I'm sure that's absolutely fine. Extra breaks, a quiet room available throughout the day. As I've said, there's all kinds of different things you can do, but as long as it's in the power, as long as you leave that power in the candidate's hands and you maintain that competitive integrity, then I think there's all kinds of different things you can do. So anyway, I've rambled on a bit too long, so Helen, I'll pass back over to yourself.
Thanks, Rory. Really, really interesting. And what I would say, because I'm just going to, Claire, I know you've come on, but I just want to finish off on this last bit. You gave us a great shout out about the advice and support that we offer, which I really appreciate. But what I would say, I think, is in all the instances that Capgemini and indeed the majority of our clients come out to us is when they are not sure whether the request is reasonable or not, that actually, this is not meant to sound patronizing, the client knows what they're doing, you as employers know what you're doing. And often I think if we go with our gut instinct of what feels right, in terms of this candidate that had asked for these adjustments for Rory, it felt okay to do it. And he explained in huge self-awareness why. And that does bring me on to sort of dealing with unreasonable requests. The last thing I really wanted to talk about is that sometimes we do get unreasonable requests. And in fact, we're going to do an event, just a workshop on this next year, because I'm getting so many requests about this. And how do we deal with them? And I think two things, as I said. One is often, I think in the majority of cases, your gut instinct is right on this and go with that. But I think we also have to remember that when we're dealing with disabled candidates, it's not about lowering standards. It's not about giving them an advantage. They still have to meet your caliber benchmark. It's not fair to you or to them to bring somebody in who's not able to do the role. So it's okay to push back. And I think this is when we do it in problem solving. So rather than, no, we can't do that, what else can we do? So what are the alternative ways to achieve the same outcome? And I think it is about being transparent about what you can and what you can't do. Interestingly, Rory said, he wanted questions in advance. We were able to do that, and we then gave them to all candidates. Now, I that's fine. That's what Capgemini and I did. I don't think you have to do that. The whole point for this person is they needed it because of their slower processing time. Not everybody has that slower processing time. So don't feel that you have to give those questions to everybody, but for some organizations, in terms of what you're assessing, that's what you wanted to do. So I just wanted to do a recent case study very briefly. And this is a law firm that came to me for this. And they've had somebody who wanted to be considered for their training contract. And they say, this is where my blood boiled immediately. I am exercising my right to submit my CV and my own application form as a reasonable adjustment to your standard process. Very legal, I think quite aggressive, very entitled. And they said, if you're a disability confident employer, I trust you'll apply the scheme's guaranteed interview commitment, noting that I not only meet, but highly exceed the criteria for this role. Well, the company law firm came to me and said that actually from their research, this diploma in law doesn't equate to the A levels that we ask for. Actually, can we, ask them about this? Absolutely. I think that's absolutely fine to do that. Now, the other thing is that this individual had basically sent through their CV. And this was them exercising their right to apply in a different format. And by doing so, they've missed out the 3 questions that the application form asks. And also it was going to miss out the video interview. Now, to me, that's not reasonable. And I was asked, do you think we can push back? Well, absolutely. So if somebody's struggling to complete your application online, maybe if it's a timed application or the format doesn't work for them, absolutely, we need to be able to do this in a different way. Maybe we need to send it to them as a Word document for them to fill in. Maybe we say you can record it, but they still have to complete the questions and they still have to do the video interview. Now, we had another one I was looking at this morning who said, I struggle, I have ADHD, I struggle with a video interview. I'm distracted by the image of myself. I'm distracted by the clock counting down. Okay, fine. Let's do it a different way. Is it a telephone interview? Is it a written exercise? Do you record your results, your conversation? So it's not about just missing out the steps. That said, the situational judgment element, we'll come on to this, I'm sure, is a barrier for individuals who are neurodivergent. It is. And that's another whole conversation. Some companies are beginning to take these out now. Rory says we don't use them. That's why I knew what you're talking about, because it comes up again and again. That's another whole conversation. So I guess in answer to these, that absolutely you can be pushing back on these. Go with your gut instinct. Often that's correct. So finally, from me, before we go to questions, just 8 things to think about. I've elaborated on these on the blog, on the ISE website. This is about talent. It's about leveling the playing field. Move away from the legal side of this, the law, the jargon. Focus on the support and what the individual needs to remove any unintended barriers in your recruitment process. You're always going to have barriers. When I audit recruitment processes, I don't look at the actual assessments themselves because somebody's always going to need extra time or questions in advance or a sign language interpreter or access. So focus on what the barriers are. So that's all from me. Before I just stop sharing my screen, Rory's reference what we do and how we help them. This is through our employers club, which Lisa's going to send more information out to you, but you do have access to me for this ad hoc advice and guidance, as well as toolkits which are useful, drop-in sessions, our training events throughout the year, and also the key that many of you want to do is advertise your roles, connect with disabled students, which you can do through our careers platform, but we can send you more information on that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I think we've got a good 10 minutes for questions. So let's have a look at what
Brilliant.
comes in.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Rory. Yeah, really interesting, really insightful to have your expertise with us today. We'll delve straight into these questions. So, okay, first one. Helen mentioned at the start that it is not permissible to ask about the adjustments that might be needed to be made in the workplace during the recruitment process. Can Helen expand on this perhaps to give guidance on what consideration can be explored during the recruitment process of what would need to be adjusted in the workplace if they were successful? So it's kind of like, where's the line, where's the threshold, what can you discuss and what can't, and maybe any examples to help bring that to life. That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, basically you can't discuss it, and it's as simple as that. And the reason I was looking off to the side is I wanted to bring up an email from Bella about this. So Bella Gore was the employment lawyer at the Business Disability Forum. You have to cut the conversation down. So let's just go back a stage. Your recruitment process needs obviously to be designed to assess for what you are looking for. So Rory, you talked about, we look for motivation, we look for passion, we look for desire. We can't teach that. That's what you're assessing for. And therefore, what is required in the job? That's what you're assessing for. Years ago, I remember a law firm saying to me, "We're bringing people in to the company that have got dyslexia, and when they get into the workplace, they're then struggling." And I said, "Well, how do you assess them?" They said, "Well, we do 2 verbal interviews." I'm like, "Well, there's your problem. That's not what law's about, just being verbal." And indeed, this is one that we've had. I was talking about this morning with somebody. This individual says they have a couple of they've got some disabilities, including a back issue, and they've said, and they're applying for law, and it said, "These conditions significantly impact my ability to complete an online assessment of this nature, despite some elements of the test being untimed. Sitting at a screen for prolonged periods, processing large volumes of text, and sustaining focus in this format present substantial barriers." Now, as I said, what I want to say to them is, well, you're applying for law. You're going to have to do this. And that's what your assessments need to do. They need to assess for what the job's going to be. And therefore, it should remove then somebody turning around and saying, "Well, I can't do this." But essentially, you cannot ask them. It's Section 60 of the Equality Act. There is a limit to what you can ask before an offer of employment is made. So you need to assess them, and your assessment needs to be robust. So you're assessing for the skills that are required. Once that offer is made, then you can say, "Let's talk about your adjustments that you need." Now, worst case scenario, they're going to ask for things that you can't input, you can't provide, and then the offer's retracted. But you can't have that discussion before then. There was something else I was going to say. I think the other thing is about making assumptions. That it's very easy to assume that. I think I had someone, I can't remember if I said this earlier, I had somebody who was concerned about somebody asking for sign language interpreter during the recruitment process and assuming, well, we wouldn't be able to provide this if they were successful. Well, you're making an assumption about what they need, and that's not necessarily the case. If somebody's absolutely adamant that they want to talk about it, then the conversation, you need to say, we can't have this conversation legally, we can't, but we can reassure you that if you're successful, then HR will have this conversation with you about what we can put in place.
Great. Thanks, Helen. Really clear. So hopefully that gives some guidance to everyone. Thank you. We've got another question. So we're finding that a lot of candidates do not know what support they need. We have open dialogue with them to support them, but is there anything else we could be doing to support this? Any thoughts on where to start there?
I think that what you're doing is the right thing, is having that open dialogue. I've been asked many times, do you have a list of adjustments we should be offering, or should we have a list on our website? And I'm kind of reluctant. We haven't done that. I'm reluctant to say to do that, because everyone's different, and what you're going to find, and that's, Rory talked about, we take this individual approach, is that if they don't see what they need on that list, then they potentially won't ask for it. So the other thing for this, for me, is perhaps don't say straight off, what did you have at university? It is about taking them through your process and identifying those barriers. And if they don't know what, they need, it might be about saying, well, we've done this for another candidate. Would this work for you? And yeah, that's that. And you might need third-party help. Rory, I don't know whether you want to come in on that one.
Yeah, I was just looking for something, but I can't seem to find it. But yeah, candidates who don't quite know what their own adjustments are, we get together as a recruitment team once a year to refine our sort of disability adjustment practices, and every year we essentially have a list of every single adjustment that we've ever given over the past God knows how many years, and we're constantly updating that with new ones. We're coming up with new ideas of things we can do, and whilst as I've said, there shouldn't be a hard and fast template for things, it's a great little resource for us to then draw from.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Rory. While you're there, Rory, there's another question for you related to your sort of Capgemini example that you gave. The question says that you mentioned that you encourage the interviewers to ask probing questions to the candidate, as they might not always know how much information to provide in an answer. Did you also encourage the interviewers to ask probing questions to all other candidates to make it fair,
Absolutely.
or was it just to that one in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, for our assessment centres, we use assessors who are already consultants in the business. So let's say you're going in for a software development role, you will be getting interviewed by software developers. So these guys are not exactly experts when it comes to adjustments or recruitment practices. So we will brief those assessors beforehand, and this is where I said, we have a neurodiverse candidate coming on board. Here's what I expect, and yes, I did put in the practice for those probing questions as well. A lot of the time, it wasn't. It was just, can you provide a bit more on this topic, for example? But we gave that opportunity to the other assessors as well, and it really didn't actually impact our final scoring in any major way as a result.
That's good you checked that as well. Brilliant.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you for clarifying. Perfect. And then I think we might just have time for one more. Let's see. Another question. I'm interested in whether applicants or graduates who have a mental health condition identify with the word disability, and whether this impacts them asking for a support or not. And thanks for a great presentation, by the way. That was the footnote. So yeah, so any thoughts on that, how mental health conditions sort of identify with disability?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I just want to go back to that very first question about adjustments in the recruitment process. Can you ask about the workplace? I think one of the other things is to be really, really clear what you're assessing for, what the job involves, because what's happening is that people are getting through the process and then turning around saying, I can't travel to a site, I can't have my video on for calls. And actually, I've got a new, just started working with an investment client, an investment bank, and they've made it very clear. We work in the office, we don't work from home, and we expected to have your videos on. I did a training for them recently, and I had 90 people with their video on, which was lovely. And yeah, so actually setting out what the job entails. Really good question, Bunny. Yeah, some people don't. They separate out mental health and neurodiversity, actually, but it all comes under the umbrella. We say something along the lines of, we put an asterisk by disability and say disability includes, but is not limited to the following conditions. And we'll name some like hearing impairment, neurodiversity, speech impairment, disfigurement, poor mental health, and we'll just name a few out to clarify what's covered by that umbrella term.
That's good. Yeah, so providing some more guidance, that's perfect. Thanks, Helen. Okay, so I'm afraid time's up, so we'll leave it there. Thank you to everyone for all your questions. There's some more in the chat and in the Q&A box, so we'll gather those together and send them through to the guys at MyPlus. to get answers for you. Obviously, thank you to Helen and Rory for sharing your experience and advice with us today. I'm sure everyone's got lots of food for thought now about how they can improve the support they provide to disabled applicants through their hiring processes. Thank you to everyone joining us today. If you enjoyed this webinar, you can sign up for future webinars on the ISE website. The next one's on the 15th of October at 2 p.m. That'll be me launching the new recruitment survey findings. So that's tomorrow for anyone who's keeping an eye on the date. We also have another webinar on the 21st of October at lunchtime with Paragon Law, and that's all about hiring international students and graduate visas. So that's all from us today. Thanks again to Helen and Rory and MyPlus, and have a great weekend, a week, everyone. See you again soon. All right. Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.